Boom, as they say. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Unity of Charlotte on this beautiful day. So grateful to have you here. My name is Marty Bacher, in case you didn't know, and I serve as the minister and spiritual director here, and it's always a privilege for me to welcome you today. I also want to welcome those who join us on Access 21 or YouTube or all the ways you can find us these days. I always like to remind ourselves that we are a spiritual community that is based upon universal spiritual principles and practices. We believe that spiritual community enhances our experience of life. It makes it richer, deeper, and more expanded. So we are here to nurture a deep and mature experience of God through the practice of unity principles. If you're joining us for the first time, we just want to welcome you. We invite you to relax, enjoy yourself. We hope you received a guest packet. We'd invite you to sign up for our email newsletter and like us on Facebook. Also want to make you aware if you're in need of spiritual support today, we do have a ministry of prayer, and we invite you to either place a prayer request in the lobby or you can go online and do the same. So there's always lots of wonderful things happening in the center. And so just want to highlight a few things. Today, first Sunday of the month, we always have potluck. Today we're adding the fun of doing barbecue because it's 4th of July. So you're certain rules that must be followed. So we invite you to join us afterwards and just enjoy each other. Next week, I'll be speaking again, but we'll also have Leah Palmer-Lick back, who always brings such a wonderful musical experience. And then on July 15th, we have John Stringer, who, I've already raved, but I'll rave some more. Just such a wonderful spiritual being and musician, all in one package. We're delighted to have him here. He and I will be co-creating a service, and then he's offering a workshop in the afternoon. I invite you to sign up for that. You can go online to register for that. We're including lunch for those who choose to join us, so it's always helpful to know that in advance. So just invite you to take advantage of that. Our kids are taking a youth outing on the 21st to the butterfly exhibit at York County Natural History Museum. More information coming on that. And then at the end of the month, we're going to introduce a new thing for us, and that is a Taizé service. We're using that term loosely, which will include singing bells to lift your chakras and chanting and singing and spoken word and may light a candle. Who knows? Who knows what could happen? So Kay and Susan are spearheading that. I'm just coming along because it sounds like fun. So, again, more details on that to follow. So with that said, let us begin our inward journey. I'd like to invite forward our wonderful new part of our ministry, Reverend Sally Robbins.
And so if you feel comfortable, I invite you to just turn within. Close your eyes. Feel yourself comfortably seated in your chair. Let go of any worries, any lists of what you have to do when you get out of here. Just let it all go. Focus on your breath, breathing in, breathing out. For in this moment, I rest. In this moment, I declare that I am the great I am that resides deep within me. I call it forth now. I call that which I am into the embodiment of my human experience. I call that forth, that which is great, powerful, beautiful, loving, kind, understanding. All of these qualities that I choose to embody now are right here in form as me. I am showing up as God, as me. And I just rest in that moment. I rest in the acknowledgement that everything I will ever need is right here and right now. Everything I am is right here and right now. I don't need to have any more strength, any more power, any more commitment. It's all here, right now. And so I know for those that perhaps came in this morning feeling a little less than, we choose in this moment to acknowledge that we are so much more than that. We are the great I am, showing up as God as us. And so if there were any ideas of lack or limitation coming in that door, we now will walk through that door later on knowing the truth of who we are. If we walked in the door with any idea of a lesser level of health than we would have liked, we will walk out knowing the truth, that we are strong and powerful and beautiful, and every cell in our body is aligned to this truth. We are so much more. And so for that, I'm incredibly grateful. I know that I am showing up as God today with my smile, with my heart, with my kindness, with my compassion. I place my demand upon the universe that this service this morning is good and very good, and that Reverend Marty is the mouthpiece of Spirit, opening our hearts, opening our minds to new ideas with which we can embody this greater I am. And so for all of this, I'm incredibly grateful. And together we say, and so it is.
So I'd like to invite you to stand and join us for the congregational song and remain standing for our affirmation. Standing. And for the first time of the month, we are saying a new affirmation. So please join me. Today, I declare my spiritual independence. I release all self-imposed limitations. I express myself fully, freely, and powerfully. I know the joy of being my authentic self. Today, I declare my spiritual independence. Thank you. So, if you've not figured it out, I'm kind of a nerd. I own it, no sense denying it. So I love American history. And consider myself a bit of a student. And so this is always that chance for me to bring my spiritual self and my historical nerd self together, and hopefully we'll get out of here before about 5 o'clock this afternoon. No, I'm not going to. But every year I reread the Declaration of Independence. Just, for me, it's a good reminder. Always go back to, what are we all about? And it reminds me who I am. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a little long, but there's just such a spiritual idea that is so profound in this writing. And so it says, in Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands with which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. And it goes on to say these words, which we all know, hopefully. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is such a radical idea. We take it for granted, but it's such a radical idea that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And then it goes on to say to the king, dude, you're not cutting it. And lists in detail why, which again is a good read, never hurts for us to hear that. And then it says, talks about these complaints, and then it says, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked for every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of the free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions from our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over. Goes on to say, so therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as a free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. And then it is signed by the representatives of these 13 United States. I share that with you today. It'll make sense in a context of that we're all a work in progress as a country and as human beings. But it is an ideal that we set for ourselves, and then we strive to live up to. So, just that it's 4th of July. Doesn't hurt to hear it one more time. So at this point, our beautiful choir is going to sing. And I bet you they'd let you sing along. Beautiful. Thank you. So, as I said, I'm a nerd. I get it. But it's fun. But it's been really helpful to me to learn more about our history. You know, sometimes we forget that things aren't just happening. They're happening in a context. And so when we are evolving, sometimes we forget. And so that's why it's important for us to have a place to anchor ourselves. For me, I have a personal mission statement. I have a mission statement for the community that we hold dear. We've set goals. We've set that. And I need to go back to those regularly to make sure that my actions are in alignment with the vision that I hold for myself. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where your actions were incongruent with the vision you hold for yourself. Right? I may be the only one, so there it is. Judge me harshly if you want to. But in looking at this, I just think we're in such an amazing time. And it's wonderful to be alive. So years ago, so I'd always had sort of an interest in history. I just, like I said, I'm a nerd. So I have copies of the Federalist Papers. Really nice, by the way. But, you know, I know not everybody's like, ooh, let's read the Federal Papers. What did Madison have to say about that, right? Geek, got it. I totally admit it. But then years ago, I don't know how long ago this was now, but I was living in Sun Valley. We'd just moved to Sun Valley. And a friend of mine ran the Sun Valley Writers Conference. And she asked me if I would help put that all together. So Sun Valley has this annual conference of amazing writers who come together and workshop, and people get to attend them. And so that particular year, David McCullough was the kind of the preeminent speaker, although they had many, and he had just completed John Adams, or it had been out and was a bestseller and was everywhere. So on our way up to the conference to get ready, we stopped to have breakfast, and I'm sitting there. Now, Sun Valley, for those of you that haven't been there, there's always been a star quality to that. When the resort was founded, they brought in Lucille Ball and Cary Grant and all these people. So if you ever get a chance to go to Sun Valley Lodge, there's these wonderful pictures of all these amazing people. So it's just this magical, wonderful place. And so I'm sitting there having my little breakfast, and in comes David McCullough and sits down. Now, the rule in Sun Valley is when cool people show up, you have to keep your cool. I'm like, no big deal, right? Just a famous person, no big deal, because that's kind of the charm there. So I'm watching, how cool, I can't wait, And so 5 minutes later, Tom Hanks comes in and sits down with him. And I'm like, all right, I'm on alert, right? And I'm like, there's a deal there's something going on here. I know there's something going on. Well, years later, I saw Tom Hanks on public radio, or on PBS, and talking about this. He said, well, I met David McCullough, and I bought the rights to John Adams, and then you know that Tom Hanks was the one that produced that. If you've never seen that series, it's brilliant. I encourage you to do it. So I was right. There was a deal. So, and I was there, although they didn't really care about my opinion then, and still don't, but nonetheless, I was there. So that actually began for me a really kind of an in-depth thing, because in reading John Adams, then I was like, wow, this is so cool to read a biography of a human being with all of his foibles who helped put this country together. And so that started all the biographies. So I've read biographies on most of the founding fathers and a lot of the founding mothers. Cokie Roberts put out a book a number of years ago called Founding Mothers, and it's brilliant. And because it turns out the guys didn't do it all by themselves. Who knew, right? There was a spiritual impulsion, I believe, that took place at this time. And these amazing people came together around an ideal that said the laws are what will govern us, not the personality, not the king. And so think about this. In the history of humanity, this was a radical idea that we would set forth a set of laws for ourselves, and that those laws would determine who we are. So we put together a constitution, and it lays out how do we function. And it put together out of an idea that human beings are human and therefore have to have checks and balances. So 3 branches of government, each keeping a balance on each other, and we move forward. Now, I love this country, and I recognize our full history, which I think we need to do. That even as these white men were putting all this together, they were others who weren't engaged in the process. And in fact, even part of the conversation in the initial putting together the Constitution, whether every white man should get to vote or just those that had property. Right? Now, it is what it is, but I think we do well to always recognize that there was a part of our history that needed to be healed. Right? So because we put this ideal that all men are created equal, then as we begin to look at that, we realize, well, maybe it's all people. Maybe, don't want to go too crazy with this, but maybe even women should be engaged in the process. Maybe this thing we call slavery doesn't stand in a nation that says all humans are created equal. And so we know that conflict that was from the very beginning, had to resolve itself. And it took a civil war for it to resolve itself, with millions of people dying for an idea, and it set forth the next step. But as we all know, the Civil War didn't end the struggle. And so, so we just keep progressing. So that's why I hear a lot of people saying, oh my God, the political environment right now is so horrible. And it is. And it's what we do as Americans. You see, that's what I love about history, is it gives you perspective that the fights started at the very beginning, right? Now, everybody came together around this idea that George Washington would be the leader. So he became our first president. They had to have this whole debate about what he would be called. Your Imperial Highness, there was a lot of different things. And the truth is, had George Washington wanted, he could have just done it as long as he wanted. But he said, nope, if we're going to do this, we don't need another king. We need a process. So then we have the second election. And we know John Adams won that election, and it was ugly. Now, in the olden days, you had whole papers affiliated with a political party. And so their editorials were fair and balanced, obviously. Right? And, there weren't a lot of checks, so there was all kinds of ugliness and all that sort of thing. But some of us don't always remember that in the olden days, when it was the Electoral College that voted for our presidents, each elector in the Electoral College got 2 votes. And so it was the first vote who the most vote getter got to be president, second got to be vice president, which created some interesting dynamics. Another really ugly election takes place between Adams and Jefferson. Now, Adams was a Federalist. Jefferson was a Democratic Republican. That was the party in those days. You see, for me, it's always fascinating to know these little tidbits that it wasn't Democrats and Republicans. If you were in a party, you were a Democratic Republican against those darn Federalists. The Federalists, whatever they said about the Federalists, right? So out of that, then, there was this wonderful election in 1800 where John Adams and Jefferson are running against each other. Now they decide we should form a ticket. So it's Jefferson and Burr against Adams and Pinckney. Turns out that Jefferson and Burr each got 73 votes. Now, if you've read your Constitution, you know that sends it to the House of Representatives, and they all get to vote. And after just 35 tries that all came up in a tie, yeah, right? There was a 36th vote, and Jefferson becomes president. Yeah. So, when we talk about this political system we're in, it's all in a context. Now, who knows if they had cable news and Facebook at the time, what that would have been like. Oh, Lord only knows, right? But my point being that this is not new. Now, Burr goes on. He decides he doesn't like being vice president. He's going to run for New York governor. Hamilton doesn't like him. They end up going to a duel. Hamilton dies. Burr doesn't ever get the job. Kind of ended his career. I don't know what that's all about, but even then, I guess you couldn't shoot people and get away with it. But right? So I just say this because for me, it's helpful to look at things in context. It's helpful to look at things in context because what I know is that we had to keep working towards a more perfect union. And so as Martin Luther King said to us, the long arc of of history moves towards justice. It could not stand to have slavery in our country if we believe what we believe, that all people are created equal. It could not stand that women would not be allowed to be full participants in this process. So we keep evolving, and then the civil rights movement has been about, wait a minute, where are we not living up to our ideal? How do we bring forward the best of who we are? So sometimes I feel like we look at things, well, that was the event and now we're fine. But no, it's like that was the event that put us on a process to keep moving forward. Now, as long as I'm geeking out, let's just go for it here. So in religion, because now that we've talked politics, let's talk religion. In case I haven't offended anybody, you're not done yet. I haven't offended everybody, and I'll get to you. But again, look at the history so in Europe, you have kings and you have one church, the Catholic Church, right? The one true church, I think they call themselves, like most churches do. But, and that was designed and developed around personality. That it was the Pope who sat at the head of that, and all these sorts of things happen. Now, then Martin Luther said, wait a minute. This can't be so. Because he was reading his Bible and said, wait a minute, there's some discrepancies here between what I'm reading and what's happening in my world. Now, step back for a minute. So this is 15-something or other. 1530, I'm thinking, but Google everything I say because facts aren't my strength. How did he read a Bible? Because not too many years earlier, the printing press came into being. And so now regular people had an opportunity to have books. Yeah. So you see the evolution of humanity, there's always a correspondence with the technology of the time. Now, the Catholic Church, and God bless us all, we're all on a path, but they were doing some stuff. In fact, some practices I'd love to adopt, but I don't think I'd get away with it. Right? You come in, you talk to me, you've sinned, and I just say, put some gold coins in my coffer, do 12 Hail Marys, and it's all good. They call it an indulgence, right? When you love that program, Sally, come on in. Just there's the gold coins, go there, here we go, be on your merry way. So there was an abuse of the power. Out of that, Luther posts his 95 disagreements on the church. And that was the start of the Protestant Reformation, a protest of the existing powers. And so that began more wars because the kings didn't like and so there was this Protestant Catholic thing happening, and many of the wars that were happening in Europe were around that. So history has this wonderful thing of not being able to resolve its issues peacefully, but it keeps moving forward. Many of the Protestants move to the United States. We often hear about the Puritans, right? And so really, in many ways, this country was formed more out of that kind of idea. And although if you want to read your history, a lot of those founding fathers would have been very comfortable with us. They had some interesting ideas about the nature of the divine. You see, even in the Declaration, it says the laws of nature and the providence of God, I think is how it said, but exactly right. They had some interesting ideas that we would feel comfortable with. So that begins a process. Now, here's the problem. I would say, here's the problem. Once you start going to the book as your authority, you got some interesting things. Because if you've read the Bible, you realize there's some conflicting ideas in here, right? And so that began this Protestantism, which became Methodists and Presbyterians, and, it goes on and on and on. Now there's I think there's 300 and some odd Protestant religions in America, because they're all using the book as their interpretation. So you go into one, and they think to be baptized, you should be sprinkled. And you go into another, and it's got to be fully dunked. And you get into these differences because people start arguing about what the book says and what it means, and then we get mad at each other, and we go start a new church. I'm reminded of the guy that was stranded on a desert island for almost 20 years. And so after a while, he figured, I've got to figure out how to live here. So he built a house and finally decided he needed some spiritual practice, some way to engage in that. So he went to create a little church or a little sanctuary for himself. So when the people finally find him, they come to rescue him. He says, well, before you go, let me show you around. Sure. And so he said, this is my home, this is where I've lived, this is the place I established for myself, but I realized I needed to have a spiritual practice, so I built this sanctuary, this chapel over here for my spiritual practice and unfoldment. And they said, oh, that's beautiful. Well, what's that other building? He says, oh, that's the church I used to go to. Right? Because, unity. We're all one. And how many upsets has this church had over its last 45 years where people said, I'm all one, but I'm not that one, right? And they go and they do their thing, and, it's all good. We're just humans. So that's why I always say, I bless all paths. Ultimately, it brings you to a greater sense of peace and joy and understanding. And you become a better person living in the world, then God bless you. Right? Because we're all one. And because these founding fathers said one of our rights is the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech. We don't have a state religion. You get to go where you want, and everyone is welcome. Now, because of that brilliance, and because of the evolution, a thing began to happen that we would call New Thought today. Transcendentalism, Emerson, Thoreau, and this thing that we refer to as New Thought. And I always like to point out that the rise of New Thought parallels the rise of feminism. Who knew? Right? So if you look at timelines and look at what's happening, in fact, so often when you talk about the history of New Thought, they talk about Quinby being the grandfather of New Thought. But when I look at it, I think it's Emma Curtis Hopkins was our grandmother. She was the founder. If you don't know Emma's story, she was having a challenge in her life, physical challenge. She went to study with a woman who had also had a healing with Quinby, and out of that she started a work. It's called Christian Science. Mary Baker Eddy. Now, a lot of people don't realize Mary Baker Eddy was the only minister ever in Christian Science. A little different model. But Emma came to study with her, had a healing, learned, and then she felt led to go start teaching. And so we refer to her as the teacher of teachers. And so some of her students were Ernest Holmes, who began religious science, the science of mind, Nona Brooks, the Brooks sisters, who started divine science, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who started unity. So when I look at this, I always say our roots come from Emma. And it also corresponded with what was happening as women were saying, well, wait a minute, maybe what they really meant was not all men are created equal, but all persons, male and female, are a part of the whole. She brought together what we now know, and then unity has evolved out of that, and we keep moving forward. Even in the, and so I was looking at, so women got the vote, 19th Amendment in 1920. It's when it actually was ratified. It's kind of amazing when you think about only 100 years that women had a right to vote. Now you see more and more women as a part of the system, which is a good thing, I believe, a very good thing. I think we'll do well to have more women in political positions because women get along better. Their last response is go to war. You never hear about women having duels. They approach it from a different way. Never mind. I'm not even going to go down that. Never mind. That's just a whole area. That's a landmine just waiting to happen. Right? So where we are today, and the reason I would like to take some time, because I do think it is a chaotic time. It feels very unsettling. People are either here or they're here. And it used to be you could have a conversation, but now it just feels like it's such a raw thing that if you say something, and that's not your point of view, right? And I keep calling to we're bigger than this. We can always be in conversation because our roots are in this divine idea that says all persons are created equally, that we're all part of the divine. Unity teaches us that we're not separate from God, but this divine presence is everywhere present, always available, and is expressing in and through and as all people. Praise the Lord for that. That changes some things, doesn't it? That changes our approach to living. When we let go of the idea that I'm going to convince this dude out there to change my life and realize that there's just a divine presence that operates according to spiritual law all of the time, then I become a co-creative being with the divine, and I become aware that if this presence is always saying yes, if the divine law is always saying yes, then I need to be very clear about what I am putting forth in my life. And so our spiritual work, as we often says, is thought, word, action, belief. That we can't argue for our limitations and then be surprised that our limitations show up in our life. Right? So, to me, it's a brilliant and beautiful thing that we keep evolving. I can tell you in New Thought, we've been around about 100 years. It's almost 100 years since the original things, 80 to 100 years, have been written and developed. We're in an evolution. Go figure. And there's a lot of people looking at, okay, well, what does that mean today? I know what Ernest Holmes said. I know what Charles and Myrtle said. I know what they said, but is that still relevant for us today? And the truth is always relevant. And yet it must evolve, the message must evolve to be relevant to the people of the day. So people are like, oh my goodness, have you watched Oprah? She talks about being co-creative. Really, I say, that's amazing, right? I mean, it is out there, and it's good. So all of this to say, as we're moved through this Freedom Month, is I wanted to put context to not only where we are as a nation, but where we are as individuals. We're always called to evolve. I know some of us think that we're going to reach this magical state of consciousness. And then little birds will chirp in the air, and butterflies will land on our hair, and we'll have money and satisfying relationships, and all good stuff will be made manifest if I can just get to that place called consciousness. Right? So we just say, yeah, we just traded in heaven for, consciousness, right? For me, and I'm only about 30 years into this, so I'm not an expert yet, but it seems that the work is ongoing. Just as it's an ongoing process for us, for our country, to keep evolving and living up to the high ideal that we have established for ourselves. That's an ongoing process. And it only works if we're engaged and involved. You know, it is said that after the Constitution was finally hammered out, and nobody was happy with it. We forget that. Nobody was happy. They didn't go, oh, this is the divine document that God gave us. There was some fighting and arguing and all kinds of stuff going on, but they came up with it, and everybody could live with it. They signed their names. They put this forth. And there's a great story. I was reading Richard Bierman, who says, our Constitution is neither self-actualizing or self-correcting. It requires the constant attention and devotion of all citizens. Our country only works if we are engaged in having it work. So the story is about Benjamin Franklin after the Constitutional Convention was approached by some citizens asking what sort of government the delegates had created. And his answer was, a republic, if you can keep it. You see, we didn't find a magic formula that would take care of us forever. We came with a system that we could keep evolving to form a more perfect union. We have a set of spiritual practices that keep us evolving as long as we stay engaged in the process. So we keep praying, we keep meditating, we keep speaking our affirmative word, and then we move into the world to do what is we are called to do from that state of being, from that state of awareness. So I'm not dismayed by what's happening in the world. I know that as we commit to recognition of who we are, what we're capable of, and work towards creating a more perfect union, we'll get through this period. And we'll figure out what's next, right? Until we have realized that ideal, that we recognize the brotherhood and sisterhood of all humanity, that we are one. You see, unity teaches us we are one, not that we are the same. So I say celebrate diversity. I love having different people in my life. It expands my awareness, whether it's political or spiritual or, ethnic, whatever. It's like, this is cool for me. I don't want everybody to be the same. That's boring. I lived in Utah. No, I'm sorry. Sorry, just couldn't help it. I love Utah. I love my Mormon friends. I love it all. It's all good. Right? So will you join me as we move into this season and we celebrate who we are? Let us truly celebrate who we are. And let us recognize that we're all part of one idea and that we each have a responsibility to move that idea forward in ways of peace and love and joy. Let's pray. We do give thanks this day for the many blessings in our lives. We give thanks for this infinite divine intelligence that is expressing everywhere, always available. We give thanks that the universe operates according to spiritual principle, to spiritual law, and that we are co-creative in that presence and that power. We know that the word that we speak creates conditions that reflect the divine idea. And so this day we speak words of peace. We speak words of joy. We speak words of harmony and love and abundance. Because we know that this one life, expressing in, through, and as all creation, is operating through us now. We claim for ourselves wholeness, revealing itself as perfect health and well-being. We claim for ourselves that we are abundant beings right here and now, for we are one with the divine source. We claim for ourselves that love is indeed the only reality. And so we see through the eyes of love, hear through the ears of love, and we allow our soul to be open to this divine presence of unconditional love. We give great thanks for the opportunity to be part of a divine idea unfolding not only as a nation, but as a spiritual community. And we lend our highest consciousness to that unfoldment. We trust that something magnificent is taking place. And so we do indeed give thanks for the many blessings of our life. We extend that blessing to this community, to the community in which we live, and indeed the community of all humanity. Together we work together for a world that works for all. We accept peace on earth and goodwill for all. We bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, and teachers of every faith, for we know that there is one power, one presence, common to all. And through the power of the living Christ, I simply speak this word and release it, knowing it is established, working for the highest good of all, in perfect timing and in divine right order. So I say, thank you, God, that this is so, and so it is. Amen.